Hey, thank you for joining us, everyone. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I want to take a second to introduce iCourts. So iCourts is a community of practice whose goal is to connect people who work in the social and behavioral sciences field of neglected tropical disease. One way in which we promote our community of practice is through our monthly knowledge cafes. So during the session, please feel free to put in any comments or questions that you have in the chat, and we will address them in the discussion portion of the session. So I will now pass it over to Dr. Alison Krentel, who will introduce our session moderator, as well as our speakers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Varsa, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. My name is Alison Krentel, and it's my pleasure to introduce this first session in a series on never treatment. And so I will begin by introducing our moderator today, is Dr. Elizabeth Juma, who has over 20 years of experience working in malaria control and elimination. She is currently the team lead of the expanded special project for the elimination of neglected tropical diseases at WHO Afro region, and we're delighted to have her. Espen. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Faraja Lyamuya. She is the Lymphatic Filariasis Program Officer at the Ministry of Health, Tanzania. Dr. Faraja has been a leader in collecting, analyzing, and using treatment data to improve mass drug administration in Tanzania. And following Dr. Faraja, we'll have Dr. Diana Stuckel, who's the Director of Monitoring and Evaluation and Learning at FHI 360. She oversees a team that focuses on the control and elimination of 5 preventive chemotherapy NTDs across 11 West African countries as part of USAID's Act West project. So we welcome our speakers today, and delighted to have everyone here with us, and look forward to the discussion. So I'll pass to you, Dr. Faraja. And you may need to come off mute, Dr. Faraja.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experience from the program on the never treatment. Yeah. As I have been introduced, my name is Faraja Lyamuya from Ministry of Health, NTD Control Program in Tanzania. I'm here to present the targeting underserved communities with NTD interventions. Lymphatic filariasis intervention in Tanzania is being supported by RTI International through the program of USAID Act to End NTDs. The history of lymphatic filariasis MDA intervention in Tanzania started in 1998 with the mapping and later on remapping, which was conducted in 2013. The findings were we had 119 AEVA endemic districts, and the MDA started in 2000, and full geographical coverage was attained in 2013. The program has been able to interrupt transmission in 114 districts. Now we have remained with 5 districts which still require mass drug administration. These 5 districts has the population of less than 1 million. The map on my left side shows the districts that remaining that require MDA, the districts that are marked with the red color. The common characteristics of the remaining 5 districts are that all the 5 districts are along the coast of Indian Ocean. The baseline prevalence for these districts was above 50%. These districts have conducted more than 10 rounds of mass drug administration. Also, they have history of failing pre-TAS or epidemiological monitoring survey at least twice. And these districts have fisheries communities with migration lifestyle. The program identified significant percent of never treated people among fisheries. I'm going to present how the never treated were identified, how big is the problem, how does it affect our progress, and how can we reach the fisheries or the underserved in these communities. How never treated were identified. The program conducted quantitative and qualitative data collection after a pre-TAS failure. We did interviews with district NTD coordinators, fishing camp leaders, community leaders, frontline health workers from the health facilities, also the community drug distributors. The interview included the HIV coordinator at the district who had experience with community outreach for fishing communities. We conducted interviews with fisheries and members from the nearby communities. We collected information on the migration pattern of the fisheries. We collected the information on past MDA participation, including the information of never treatment. Also, we did antigen testing using filario test strip testing of 2 fishing communities. And we had around 150 individuals from each community. Also, the 2 nearby villages, whereby we included around 300 individuals from each village. I'm going to present the findings from Kilwa District. Kilwa District is located at the southeast of the country. You can see the small map on my right side. Is the map of Tanzania showing where the Kilwa is located. Kilwa District had the baseline antigenemia prevalence of 56%. The district has the history of failing pre-TAS twice in 2018 and 2020. Also, the district conducted 14 rounds of mass drug administration. The reported MDA coverage in 2021 was 78%. On the same year, the program conducted coverage evaluation survey, and the findings was the coverage of 33%, and the never treated were 23%. Here is the map of Kilwa. It shows the treatment status of all sites that we surveyed. The orange color, it shows the proportion of never treated. And as you can see, the never treated are found in almost all sites. The 2 sites pointed by the red arrow, these are the sites with the fisheries communities where we conducted our surveys. This shows the information on the migration pattern among fisheries. And they have reported migrating to more than 10 different sites along the Indian Ocean, starting from the north of the ocean. All the areas that are marked with the green color, These are the areas that were mentioned by the fisheries that they are migrating for fishing. The two areas that are marked with the brown colors, these are the sites where we tested the fisheries. And migration also include the 3 islands in Tanzania, that is Zanzibar, the 2 islands, and one which is called Mafia. Also, they are migrating also to the nearby country that is Mozambique. Fisheries have high prevalence of never treatment and also the antigen positivity. In fisheries, 69% of participants had never been treated. And also we found that in these fisheries communities, 7.7% of participants were antigen positive. Also in the nearby villages, 47% of participants had never been treated. And among them, in the nearby villages, 2.3% of participants were antigen positive. LF prevalence was higher among the never treated groups in both groups, the fisheries and nearby communities. We found that the antigen prevalence was 12.2% in never treated among fisheries. It was 2% in those who were treated once and 0% in those who were treated more than once. And also in the nearby villages, also the never treated has the higher percent compared to the others. It was 3.7 among those who were never treated, 1.3% among those who were treated once, and 1.1% among those who were treated more than once. The qualitative findings. We have found that some community drug distributors leave the medicine for fishermen who are away from home, while the program is emphasizing on direct observed treatment. Also, we found that the low literacy makes the banners and flyers a poor choice for social mobilization. And it was discussed that person-to-person education is more trusted. From the HIV coordinator, we have learned that the HIV peer educator model has been successful in reaching fishing communities with education, condom, and self-test kits, including regular testing week campaign. The key barriers to the optimal mass drug administration coverage in Kilwa districts were as follows. First is absenteeism of men during MDA due to economic activities, and mainly it is fishing. Second is the male dominance in decision making. This makes the family members sometimes to refuse participating to the MDA, either because the male are not at home or they are forbidden by men to participate. Third is the fear of side effects from the medication, lack of community leaders' engagement during intervention. Next is inadequate knowledge among community members on LF and preventive chemotherapy. Also, we found that there is a community perception that the hydrocele affects only men. So the lymphatic filariasis problem, it is only for men, and the women, they don't need to participate to the intervention. The targeted intervention to improve the MDA. The program implemented the micro-planning with fisheries leaders. As the result of the micro-planning, we used the fishermen as community drug distributor to educate the community and to distribute the drugs. Also, we established the fixed posts in fishing communities, and these posts were located at the port, at tea and coffee stations, and also at the TV stands. The targeted social mobilization and outreach to the boat owners and community leaders was one of the interventions that was used to convince and reach this fishing community. Also, we did the targeted supervision in fisheries areas and increased transport resources, including the boats. After implementing the additional intervention to improve the MDA uptake was improved comparing 2022 and 2023. The blue color shows the data from 2022, and these were the data from the community registers. And the orange color shows the data from 2023. The 3 villages that marked with the oversight post, these represent the fishing communities. As you can see, there was a marked improvement in these communities because before the intervention, all the MDA coverage were below the optimum coverage of 65%. But after the additional interventions, there was a marked improvement up to the more than 80%. The districts have been able to pass epidemiological monitoring survey in 2024, this year. The implementation unit was divided into 2 evaluation units, East and West. And as shown in the table, that the microfilaria prevalence was less than 1% in all 6 sites. So both evaluation units passed pre-task. Also, we were able to conduct the transmission assessment survey 1 this year, and both evaluation units passed. In Kilwa West evaluation unit, 1,512 children were tested and none of them was found positive. In Kilwa East, 1,567 children were tested and only 1 was tested positive. So our program decided to stop MDA to continue with surveillance. In conclusion, the never treated information is the signal to investigate further. Fisheries were among the underserved community by NTD interventions. Also, there was an association of never treated and the infection rates. Second, the targeted social mobilization was critical to strengthen the MDA and improve the coverage. Also, the never treated is the problem in the remaining hotspot areas in the countries, as all 5 remaining implementation units have the fisheries communities with the migration lifestyle. Would like to acknowledge the support from USAID Act to End NTD East, staff from the headquarters and the country office for their technical and financial support. Also would like to acknowledge the support from Kilwa District Authority, sectors and programs working with fisheries, as we have been able to learn from them, and communities in Kilwa District. Thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. And thank you very much, Dr. Faraja Lyamuya, for that very clear presentation from your experience in Tanzania. Dear participants, please keep your questions. I've seen some of them already coming in the chat, and we shall take them after Diana's presentation. So over to you, Diana, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Can you hear me? I think you can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. It gives me great pleasure this morning or this afternoon, wherever you're situated, to be able to present to you the work that was undertaken under the auspices of ACT and NTDs West. It was done in collaboration with my colleague, Kasta Bwag, who is a MEL technical advisor on our MEL team. The title of the talk is Unraveling the Mystery of Never Treated Populations, which is an investigation using results from coverage evaluation surveys across 6 West African countries. So in introduction, who are we? The ACT to End NTDs West program is an 8-year cooperative agreement. It's funded by USAID, and it helps to assist countries in achieving either elimination or control for the 5 preventive chemotherapy NTDs, which include lymphatic filariasis, trachoma, onchocerciasis, schistosomiasis, and 3 soil-transmitted helminths. And the project spans 11 West African countries. So what do? We assist ministries of health in those 11 countries to administer or to undertake mass drug administration, which targets groups of individuals only in the endemic districts for those diseases with preventive chemotherapy drugs. And very often, but not always, and shortly thereafter, the mass drug administration will undertake a limited coverage evaluation survey in some of the more problematic districts or sub-districts. And a coverage evaluation survey, as many of you know, is a population-based survey, and it's got 2 chief aims. One is to be able to validate the coverage that was observed by the reported coverage observed during the mass drug administration. And more importantly, the second aim, well, in my opinion, more importantly, the second aim is to be able to elucidate information on knowledge, attitudes, and practices, or CAP information, on those both treated and those not treated, with the aim of improving coverage in future rounds. So in 2022, 23, and 24, ACT West added questions on the never treated populations to the CAP questionnaire for all the coverage surveys that we wanted to undertake. And just to reiterate something you all already know, what we loosely define never treated as those who were not treated in the MDA round to which the coverage survey is affiliated, or on any other past round that was available to them. So they were never treated for the disease in question. So framing the research a little bit, we wanted to analyze the never treated population in terms of their characteristics to better target them in future rounds. So we did univariate analysis, which was just associations between never treated and key outcomes like age, sex, occupation, education, etc. And then what we did was a more complex analysis using two different kinds of multi-level regression models, logistic regression models, to quantify the association. So here, we wanted to see in the first case, never treated was the outcome variable. And then it was a multivariable model. So there were a host of explanatory variables like age, sex, occupation, etc. So that was the first kind of model. The second kind of model used hematuria or infection data as the outcome. This was only for one country for which we collected that data, Togo. So it's the association between hematuria and a variety of explanatory variables, which included now never treated as an explanatory variable. Now, the reason why we did the second type of regression is because it's suspected that never treated populations are a potential reservoir of ongoing infection. However, we have to test that hypothesis. We don't know that for certain, and that second type of regression will allow us to test that statistically. So as I mentioned, only one country collected information on both never treated and proxy for infection data on schistosomiasis using hemosticks on school-age children, and that was Togo. We also, as part of the research, did a geospatial analysis on maps, plot, and tried to identify clustering of patterns. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay. What were our data sources? We used 8 coverage evaluation surveys across 6 countries supported by Act West, including Burkina Faso, Ghana, Guinea, Niger, Sierra Leone, and Togo. Niger had 3 coverage evaluation surveys, which we amalgamated into one data set. The years covered for the coverage survey spanned 2022 and 2023, and the MDAs affiliated with them were no more than 6 months earlier than that. The diseases spanned were all 5 PCNTDs across the countries, not in every single coverage survey. Some of the countries had integrated MDAs, LF, Onco, or trachoma LF. And so the coverage surveys themselves were also integrated. I'll leave this other detail to one side for a moment. I apologize in advance for the cluttered nature of this slide. I just wanted to highlight a couple of salient points here. On the left, you can see the 6 countries. I hope you can see my cursor move. The 6 countries for which we had data sets and the year in which the coverage evaluation survey took place. You can see Niger had 3 coverage surveys spanning trachoma and LF. I think 2 were trachoma, 1 was LF. The diseases that for which MDA was undertaken, and of course the commensurate coverage evaluation survey was undertaken, are noted here. You can see some are integrated. Burkina Faso has jointly administered LF and Onco treatment. So I'm going to skip this detail and move to the very far right to point out to you the raw scores, the percentage of never treated that we saw. So these are sample survey-based estimates of never treated from the coverage survey. And you can see the low value is 4.7 in Ghana, and the high value is around 16% in Guinea and Burkina Faso. These are not atypical values. From single digit to low double digit is not unusual. Just a spoiler alert, when we recomputed this using sample survey weights, all the percentage of never treated dropped by about 1%, but we'll get to survey weights a little later in the conversation. So that's just to give you a flavor of what order of magnitude we're talking about here. Now, the first set of results. So if you recall, there were 2 types of logistic regression we undertook. This is the first kind. We did a logistic regression for each individual country. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to highlight Niger because it has some interesting results and it's emblematic of what happened in other countries. So we did, just to refresh your memory, a multi-level regression model where here never treated is the outcome. And on the explanatory variable side, we had a host of variables, different age groups you can see here. Occupations such as breeder, shepherder, against household chores, a number of others. We had some wash variables, we had sex, etc. So how do I read this forest plot of results? Well, it's indicated in terms of what's called an odds ratio. And briefly, an odds ratio of greater than 1 means you have a higher likelihood of being never treated as compared to being treated at least once in relation to the variable we're talking about. And importantly, it's that odds ratio is only significant if the confidence interval of the odds ratio does not include the value 1. So here you can see the orange line is a confidence interval. The hatched blue vertical line at 1 shows you that this first confidence interval at the top, access to safe drinking water, does not span the value 1. So it is indeed significant. So how do I read this? Well, just looking at the first value, you would read this result to say that you have a 3.8 times more likely to be never treated if there's no access to safe drinking water, as opposed to having access to safe drinking water, which makes sense, of course, and it's significant. Then looking at one of the age groups we considered, the under 5s, these were 3 points. Again, the odds ratio is 3.69. So that age group is 3.6, has 3.69 odds, higher odds of being never treated in relation to our reference group age group, which was the 35 plus age group. We always picked reference group where we thought the risk of being never treated was a little lower. Then interestingly, we looked at occupations. There were many of them, but breeder, we haven't shown all the factors here, but breeder shepherder had 2.83 times the odds of being, higher odds of being never treated than the reference group of household chores, which again makes sense. Being a breeder shepherder puts you at higher risk, and so on. As you go down the forest plot, you see some of these are no longer significant because they cross the value 1. So, and then there are a whole host of variables we don't show you here just because we don't have the room. We've done the same work for all the countries. I'm not going to show you the results in the interest of time. I'm going to skip to the second type of analysis. On Togo, if you recall, this is the one country where hematuria infection data was collected on school-age children. And so we want to exploit that to look at the association between never treated and hematuria positive. So the first crude, and I'll call it crude because it's a visual analysis, we plotted on a map villages. So each dot here is a village. The villages are color-coded from 0%, meaning there are 0 hematuria positive school-age children, or SAC, in that village, to red, where there are greater than 20% hematuria positive in that village. If you look at the middle part of Togo and then blow it up, you can see indeed there are some problem villages sitting near Atakpame, which I visited during this during field work. Now I want you to keep this visual image in mind as I move to the next map, which is associated with this. I do the exact same thing, except now it's for never treated, not hematuria positive. So in the next map, again, villages are plotted, color-coded once again, with 0% never treated being green and more than 20% being greater than 20% of the persons are never treated in a village if it's red. This time we blow up the same part of the country and we don't see the same problem. So that kind of gives us a heuristic notion that maybe there isn't an association between never treated and being hematuria positive, which is what we would not expect to see. But this is at the village level, recall that. So we wanted to do a more statistically rigorous analysis of that. So here on the left, you can see a graph. Each dot is a village, and we plot never treated against hematuria positive. We do a Pearson's chi-square, and you can see in the upper right-hand side, the R value is 0.2, which indeed confirms our suspicion that it's a very weak association between never treated and hematuria positive, which is not the outcome we were thinking we would see. But again, that's at the village level. So the next step was then to undertake that second kind of logistic regression model at the individual level, rather than the village level. And if you recall, the second kind of model used now hematuria as an outcome, as the outcome variable, and never treated was actually one of the explanatory variables, among other variables. And what you see here as a result is there's actually 2.6 times odds of being hematuria positive if you're never treated as compared to if you're treated just once. And that's significant because the confidence interval does not include 1. It's 1.18 to 5.75. So this is the result we were expecting to see, that there is indeed an association which gives indication there might be a reason to believe that never treated are a potential reservoir of infection. So I know we're running out of time. I'm not going to go through the summary slides. I simply have one more slide on next steps. So that is where we are so far. What would we like to do next? If you recall, the models that we looked at included only individual level and household level factors like age, sex, education, occupation, household size, etc. The model fits that Kustub and I got were not great. They were good, but not great. And so we felt that maybe the models weren't including all the variability that they might be able to. And so maybe we're missing some variables that would lead to a better model fit, would explain more of the variation. So we consider different levels and variables associated at those levels. At the village level, we aim to include temperature, precipitation, elevation, travel time to nearest health facility. And at the level up, sub-district or district level, number of rounds of MDA, baseline prevalence, etc. Spoiler alert, Kustub has already done a limited fit for some of the countries, and the outcomes have changed quite substantially. The fit of the models are better, and the odds ratios that are significant do change. The second thing we want to do is we want to look at why some countries have a much higher rate of never treated than others. You can see Guinea and Burkina Faso had higher rates compared to Ghana. We would need to do a cross-country model that includes all the countries at once and look at the explanatory factors to be able to get at that. That's not been done yet. Next, it's of interest. What we've done so far is treated, never treated variable as two-sided, never treated and treated at least once. We'd like to break that into 3 categories: never treated, treated once, and treated more than once. And why do we want to do that? Literature suggests that being treated once could be as bad, especially if being treated once in the distant past, could be as bad as being never treated in terms of being a reservoir of infection. So the question becomes, are we grouping individuals incorrectly? Should we be grouping the never treated with the treated once for the purposes of analysis? So that's an analysis to come. We have not yet done that. Importantly, most coverage evaluation surveys that I know of in all of the ACT portfolios don't use sample survey weights under the assumption that it's a self-weighting design and they're not needed. We have found that that's absolutely not the case, and the sample weights should be included. They alter and put into models. They alter the results quite significantly. Kustub has worked hard, at least for Togo, to backwards engineer the weights, put them in, and we found that there were different outcomes using weighted models, which took weights into account and models which didn't. We didn't have the ability to integrate those results in this presentation. And finally, we want to include data sets from other countries like Senegal, potentially Benin. Those are two countries that have also collected schistohematuria data to further the investigation on the association between infection and never treated. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge the other contributors to this, Elizabeth Chop and Angel Wang from Helen Keller, who's one of our partners, as well as Maureen Headland from FHI 360, and our 6 ministries of health with whom we work very closely. And finally, our generous sponsor, USAID, without whom we would not be able to undertake this work. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And thank you very much, Diana, for that very, very loaded presentation, but also very interesting. So yes, I have questions for both of you. And perhaps beginning with Dr. Faraja. And I have 2 questions from you, perhaps 3. Whether one is from Yaya Kulibali, who's asking whether in your studies, did you find any reports of adverse events after treatment? Were the fishermen able to, or community members able to show any adverse events after treatment? And then another question from Laura, did you find other groups of never treated other than the fishermen that you encountered? So perhaps you can take those 2 questions and then we'll move on to Diane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you for those who have asked these 2 questions. Responding to the first question, first, if the participants were able to show any body from the community that have experienced adverse reaction, the answer is no. They were not able to show anybody had adverse event reaction. And the program here in Tanzania, we are using ivermectin and albendazole. We have never found the reports from the districts of adverse drug reaction from these 2 drugs. And this is it is the common barrier and perception by the community, but it has never happened. On the second question, if we have been able to identify another group with the higher rate of never treated here in Tanzania, the answer is yes. We have been able to identify the never treated among people with the disorder of substance abuse. Yeah, these are the people who have not been participating to the MDAs because the community drug distributor were afraid in giving them the drugs based on their condition. So we have found also the high positivity rates among them. We are compiling the information from 2 sites and it will be shared for further discussion. So this is the second group that we have identified here in Tanzania. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much for that. And it's actually interesting that, yes, we may not actually think of those who have substance abuse issues as also, you know, being unreached by NTD programs, yet they are quite targeted by HIV programs. I think it is, we look forward to the next steps. Over to you, Diana. One was more a funding question. There are countries, I think participants from countries or someone anonymous, I couldn't get their name, whether countries that were not included get some funding to conduct similar non-treated or reach non-treated communities. And I think Sean also, this might be a comment that you could address, saying the relationship between hematuria and treatment is one, as you have seen, could go either way. And, maybe they have, hematuria could be seen by the community as increased perception of risk or severity and therefore more access to treatment. Or, that's why you may have the opposite sense than what is expected. So perhaps maybe some of your thoughts on those comments before we go back to Dr. Faraja for some additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thank you for that, Elizabeth. The first one I perceived was a question on an interest in being able to conduct coverage evaluation surveys. Well, it was framed as never treated surveys. I'd like to be clear, these aren't actually never treated surveys. What they are opportunistically including and collecting information on the never treated and infection under the auspices of coverage evaluation surveys. And coverage evaluation surveys are done rather pro forma as part of our programs when we, under the Act East and Act West programs, after MDA, after Mass Drug Administration, they're typically done in districts that are deemed problematic. Say, if let's say 50 districts undergo treatment and 3 or 4 of them are very problematic because they don't quite achieve the threshold of coverage desired, often coverage surveys are done in those problematic districts to try to elucidate what's going on. So we then opportunistically, and it's not typically done, embedded questions on never treated, because what's typically asked in coverage surveys are questions on the treated, not the never treated or non-treated. So we wanted to find out more about the never treated. And in fact, what's very rarely done is collecting infection data in those types of surveys. So 2 parts to, I'm going roundabout in answering your question. Coverage evaluation surveys are fairly pro forma in our NTD programs, but the studies we did are opportunistic. So I'm not sure who the person asking the question is and in what context, what their affiliation with NTD programs are, whether they belong to a Ministry of Health, but if they send me their name, we can talk offline on that topic. The second question I'm reading, and it's from Sean Gallahan, I think. And I'm not sure I fully understand why the hypothesis might be that there could be an opposite outcome, because the way I'm reading it, and maybe I'm not reading it very well, it's saying, well, if there's more severe hematuria, you might expect to see lower levels of never treatment. In other words, higher levels of treatment. I see what you mean, that if it's more hematuria intense, maybe programs target those areas for treatment. I think that's true. That's absolutely true, grosso modo, about an endemic district or endemic subdistrict or even villages. But the never treated are people, and they have their own unique characteristics. They have certain occupations that put them at risk, or they're in certain age groups, or they have a certain point of view towards treatment. So while I think it's true that grosso modo, districts or geographic areas that are at higher risk of hematuria, say, as a proxy for infection, might be more targeted for treatment, the individuals within behave very differently in terms of accepting treatment or rejecting treatment or being absent for treatment because of their work or what have you. So, I mean, I think you make a very interesting point. So thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Diana. Back to Dr. Faraja. I think you've seen the question in the chat, but it's basically micro-planning. How do you define micro-planning, and what goes into the new process that you are currently undertaking that, if you do well, can help identify the lapses that led to unreached or never treated populations. So basically, what do you do in your micro planning? Yeah, and I think that's yeah, for you, as then we'll go back to Diana. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yeah, the micro planning, it's defined as the bottom-up approach in the planning process of implementing mass drug administration, involving the local people and local leaders who are actually implementing the intervention. So in our setting, we identified the supervisory areas with the lowest MDA coverage and the areas with fisheries communities. Thereafter, we did the micro-planning training with the district team, and then we conducted the micro-planning sessions at the supervisory areas. In our setting is the health facilities. And in the micro-planning sessions, we included the frontline health workers, community leaders, fisheries camp leaders, drug distributors. And in this session, first we discuss the situation and the challenges faced in the previous MDAs. Then we are discussing the reasons for not reaching the optimal MDA coverage. Also, we are filling the WHO micro-planning tools at the supervisory area. This will identify further the challenges, also will identify the gaps in terms of resources, in terms of human resources, in terms of timing of MDA, in terms of the channels of conducting MDA. That is where we have identified doing house-to-house mode of drug distribution alone among the fisheries will not be sufficient. Then we added the posts on top of house-to-house distribution. So that is how we are conducting the micro-planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Faraja. And Rabiu Ibrahim, as you've just heard from her last statement, they actually use a WHO micro-planning tool, but they bring everyone from the community together to discuss who, what, where, and what to address any challenges they might face. Back to you, Diana. I think one of the issues that we wanted to raise is that the perception of severe hematuria might drive people more to treatment on one hand. And since these were school-age children, maybe that's, I think Dr. Tajuddin Yusuf has probably explained that based on the population. However, there is there another question for you? I think, yes, there is something about covering mobile and migrant populations in these studies. I think you've talked a lot about the CES and the opportunities, but maybe it is likely that you can explain again these populations before we go back to Dr. Faraja. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I see. Does your study cover mobile and migrant populations? So again, it doesn't specifically. In the countries in which coverage evaluation surveys were done, we had to behave as a secondary add-on feature. In other words, the coverage evaluation surveys were designed to serve the chief purpose of validating coverage. So they didn't necessarily go to areas that had issues with mobile and migrant populations. They went to districts where coverage was low for whatever reason. And so we had to sort of live with the context of the coverage evaluation, the setting of the coverage evaluation survey. So it wasn't a primary primary data set in the sense that we got to design the survey and go to the places we wanted to go to. We were an add-on. We added on questions on never treated and hematuria, as I said, opportunistically, and we had little say on the actual design. Would we have liked to have done that? Absolutely. So maybe in the future, because there are coverage surveys that are more focused on low coverage due to mobile and migrant populations, it would be great to, in the future, and we will be continuing to do this, add on the never treated aspect and measuring infection in those settings as well. That's a great observation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both. And maybe one last question, which any of you can respond to, is the question on LF. They say WHO's optimum coverage is 65%. Why would you be worried if you find a never treated population of 16%? And perhaps this also has to do with, you know, the targeted population and the expectation. So I don't know if whether it's Diana or Dr. Faraja, you would like to respond.
Maybe I start responding.
Yes, and I'll take it after you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, responding on this, if you remember the data that I presented, the prevalence of infection among the never treated, it was quite very high. So having even few never treated in the community is a very risk for the recrudescence of the infection later. So these will remain as the reservoirs of infection in these communities.
Yeah, I don't have much.
Thank you. Thank you. Diana, go ahead.
They start the infection also and
Go ahead.
do accordingly.
Sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Farah.
Go ahead, Dr. Faraja.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was saying that it's very critical and crucial to look at the never treated group because we have seen they have the higher rate of infection. So they will remain to be reservoirs and facilitate recrudescence of infection. Thank you.
Excellent. And I see maybe Diana, do you want to say something? I see Alison has also posted a resource for the person who answered the question. And I think that might give it. And the importance, I would just adding, you know, when Dr. Faraja was talking, she said these communities continually failed the pre-TAS. And so something actually had to be done based on that. So I think it remains important to do.
Yeah, and just to add, while it's absolutely, that's a very good point, that the thresholds of coverage are much, much higher, that maybe you could argue that the percentage of never treated does not put that at risk. But those thresholds are often applied to much larger geographies, like district level. And you could see in my geospatial analysis, there were villages that were kind of hotspots. And that had rather higher, more than 20%, and I don't know how much higher than 20% never treated. What you saw at the beginning were average rates. Certain villages could in fact be quite a bit higher, and depending on where they're located, saying in a border area or a area that experiences a lot of migration, as Faraja said, they can then help to propagate the disease, behave as a reservoir of infection, etc. So I think it's partly the answer lies in the macro versus the micro and the threats therein.
Thank you very much both for those comments and questions and answers. We are coming to a close of this cafe, and I'm really grateful for your time and your presentations. So I'll take you back to Vasa, who has a poll for all of us, and I would like to request everyone to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Elizabeth Juma for moderating and our two speakers, Dr. Diana and Dr. Faraja. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We had a lot of great discussions today. Please take a moment to take the Zoom poll before you leave and join us for our next webinar on never treatment in January. If you have not joined as a member of iCourts, please click the link in the chat and fill out the form. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we hope that many of you will join the calls. Thank you. iCourts. Click the chat and complete the poll.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.